Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Rebecca Cornish, and today we're going to be talking about coping mechanisms of the patrol subculture. Now, specifically today, we're going to be talking about law enforcement and the organizational culture of law enforcement agencies, as well as the subculture of the patrol division, which exists in every law enforcement agency. We're also going to be discussing the organizational and occupational environments and how patrol officers adapt to really the difficulties and the conflict that come from those two environments and some of the issues that adaptation can actually create. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, we're first going to be discussing the organizational culture. So this is going to apply to really every organization, but we're specifically going to touch on law enforcement departments. Now, organizational culture is really a system of shared meaning that's held by the members of that organization. And that system of shared meaning distinguishes it from other organizations. So if you look at the culture of like criminal justice agencies, for example, there are going to be some differences than other organizations. And even in the criminal justice field itself, you're going to have differences amongst the various organizations. Law enforcement departments, their organizational culture is going to be a little bit different than correctional departments, which are going to be a bit different than your criminal court departments. Now, for law enforcement, their organizational culture is really created, maintained, and influenced by state and federal statutes, local ordinances, state, federal, and professional regulations and guidelines, department policy and procedure, the code of ethics, and also the mission, vision, and goals of the organization. Now, I will add that the organizational culture of law enforcement agencies is also impacted by changes in case law, both federal and state. Now, the official organizational culture of law enforcement agencies, it's impacted by three sources. And the first is external, changes in the political and societal ideation, mandates, criminal statutes, case law, etc. So think of, let's say, when community oriented and problem oriented policing first came on the scene. That was a huge impact. And it was both external as well as internal. And it really changed departments. Now, your internal are cultural differences amongst staff, formal frame structures like control efforts based on training, policy and procedures, supervisory structures, formal sanctions that are imposed to ensure conformity. Basically, staff are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Also changes in administration, changes in department mission, objectives, and policy and procedure. So like when community-oriented and problem-oriented policing first came on the scene, huge shift from traditional policing, which is reactive. A crime happens, we're going to handle it. we are separate from the community. We're the experts. We know how to handle crime. We know how to handle police. Well, community-oriented and problem-oriented policing, way different than traditional policing. So departments, as they started adapting, adopting the two models, it was a huge shift in the organizational culture. Now, in formal structures, the staff themselves, how they view their job, the informal control that they exhibit on each other to control behavior and get conformities such as peer pressure and other informal sanctions, that also impacts that official organizational culture as well. So again, you've got three sources: external changes, which can be either political or societal, also changes in criminal statutes and case law. You've got internal changes, and then also changes from that informal structure coming from the staff themselves. Now, within every organization, you have subcultures. So really, they're little pockets within the organization. Now, they're groups that share their own beliefs and norms while they share the values of the dominant culture. So they still share, all the values and everything of that big official organizational culture, but they have their own little groups. And you'll have, for law enforcement, you'll have subcultures that'll emerge within a department among the various job classifications. Like patrol will have its own little subculture, dispatch will have its own subculture, detectives, animal control, SWAT will have its own subculture. Your crisis negotiation team will have their own subculture. Also, you'll have subcultures amongst shifts. Predominantly in law enforcement right now, when it comes to patrol, you have two shifts: day shift, night shift. Most departments go with 12-hour shifts now. Although some might do 10, there might still be a few that actually do 8-hour shifts. But each shift is going to have its own little subculture as well. And also, you're going to have differences in the work environments as well. Like amongst patrol, for example, even though patrol is its own subculture, you might have, even amongst the patrol division of a department, subcultures within that subculture. Like if you have one division that they're more in an urban area with a lot of crime, they're going to be a bit different than the part of the patrol division that patrols the quiet suburbs. Now, the subcultures, they serve as a staff's primary peer group within that organization. And they can influence and support staff. They can also exude informal control on staff. So basically, like policing their own. So if somebody's messing up, hey man, you can't be doing that. Or hey, this is what you should be doing instead. Or if a staff's having a hard time, hey, what do you need? I'm right here with you. I'm going to help you out through this. Now, the values of the patrol subculture, they're derived from the hazards of the job. and seeking to really minimize those hazards and protect its members. Patrol especially is very dangerous, and that's because when you're on the streets working, regardless of the type of call you're going on, you have no clue what you're actually going to find on that call. It could be a quote unquote routine call, and you go on it, and then all hell breaks loose. So you don't know exactly what's going on. You don't know the intent of the individuals involved, if there's weapons present, etc. You're walking into a lot of unknowns. And if a situation goes bad, it can go really bad. Now, new staff, they become a part of both the official organizational culture as well as the subculture through what's called serial socialization. And really, that comes from the formal and informal training. So, like when they go to the academy, when they're in the field training officer program, and then just dealing with their coworkers, especially those that have more experience than they do. Now, the subculture in particular teaches the day-to-day components of the job. And really, they serve as a buffer that aids staff in handling the stress related to the job. So, like if there's a bad call, you might have officers that'll get together after shift and just kind of unwind. Or, hey, I know that was a bad call. How are you doing? So there are a lot of good things that can come out of the patrol subculture. Are there some bad things? Yes, there can be. Now, the culture is made of, excuse me, I am still recovering from my cold, so I apologize for any coughing. But the culture is made of two environments. You have the occupational environment, which is the staff's relationship to general society. And that's influenced by the presence of danger or the potential of danger and coercive authority, which coercive authority, that's the authority law enforcement has over citizens. And that authority comes from mainly the fact that you have the power to arrest. You also have the power to make decisions on how the situation is going to be handled. So law enforcement does have a lot of authority, especially patrol, because patrol is the facet of a law enforcement department that the community actually deals with the most. As far as patrol officers, they're the ones that are on the street actually dealing with the citizens. So the occupational environment, it's affected by the dangerousness of the job, as well as your authority as a patrol officer, regardless of whether you're working for a police department, a sheriff's department, you're a state trooper, etc. Then you also have the organizational environment, which is the staff's relationship to the formal organization. And that's influenced by supervisor scrutiny and role ambiguity. And we're going to be going into what those terms are. But the patrol subculture, they're going to develop coping mechanisms or prescriptions, ways of dealing with the stress and anxiety that they'll encounter from these two environments. And those coping mechanisms, they're going to guide the attitudes and behaviors of the subculture members. So if those coping mechanisms are good, then the adaptations are going to be good. But if they run askew, get awry, basically turn to the dark side of the force, so to speak, then yes, they can have a negative impact. Now, we're first going to touch on the occupational environment and the coping mechanisms that patrol officers are going to use in dealing with the dangerousness of the job and their authority over citizens. Now, the first is suspiciousness. Now, really, this is a survival tool, and it's used to deal with danger. Again, as I stated, with law enforcement, especially patrol, you don't know what you're going to encounter. When you walk into a situation, you don't know the intent of the people involved. You don't know if there's weapons present. I mean, look at a traffic stop, for example. So many unknowns with a traffic stop. Just the vehicle you're stopping itself, you can't always tell how many people are in the vehicle. You are not going to know if there's weapons in that vehicle. You're not going to know if the driver and or occupants, what their intent is. Are they planning on harming you? You don't know if there's other contraband in the vehicle. You don't know what they just did before you stop them in a lot of cases. And then you've also got really the exterior environment on that call too. Hey, how close is my backup? How busy is the street I pulled this person over? You've got so many factors in with just a traffic stop, and think of the other situations that law enforcement encounters. How many calls you go on where you don't know. So to deal with the dangerousness of the job, an officer has to remain vigilant. Basically, you've got to be paying attention to what's going on around you. You've got to be paying attention to who you're talking to, what they're saying, how they're saying it, eye contact, body language. Are they fiddling with their pockets? If there's other people that are in that immediate area, you've got to also be paying attention to them. And then you've got to make sure you're also paying attention to what's going on outside of that situation. It's basically you have to have eyes pretty much all around your head, and you've got to be constantly paying attention. It's a safety issue. So, and you do, with every situation, you do have to have some caution. And that's really to protect yourself and to avoid the potential that you're going to get seriously injured or killed. Now, I'm not saying that officers walk in every situation scared. That's not it. It's basically they're making sure they're paying attention to everything that's going on, trying their best not to get themselves into a bad situation knowingly. Taking the precautions to protect themselves. Now, as a result of this, the individuals you contact on the job, you do have to view them as a potential danger. You cannot view them that way because you don't know. Again, going back to that traffic stop, you hear in the news once in a while that there's an officer They pull a vehicle over and they approach the driver's side window, you know, how you doing today? I need to see your driver's license, registration, proof for insurance. Bang! They end up getting shot by either the driver or one of the occupants. So, as an officer for protection, you do have to view everyone as a potential danger. Now, you can see how that could get carried to the extreme and be a bad thing. Because there's a difference between, okay, this person could be potentially a danger. I just got to make sure I'm not getting too comfortable. I'm not letting my guard down. I'm not getting complacent. I got to make sure I'm paying attention versus, well, you're a citizen and you're bad and you're a danger to me. There's a difference. Now, next is maintaining the edge. Now, that's related to law enforcement's authority over citizens, that coercive authority, the fact that you can arrest, that in some cases you do have discretion over how you handle the call. So it's related to displaying authority, and the belief of potential danger can be minimized and authority displayed by always being vigilant. So you're kind of coming into the situation that, hey, I'm a law enforcement officer. Now, both suspiciousness and maintain the edge, they are survival tools and they are reinforced through training and experience. Again, in and of themselves, it's not a bad thing. The fact that law enforcement does have authority over citizens, that's not a bad thing. The fact that you have to view everyone you come into contact with a potential danger, that's not a bad thing. But it can be taken to a major extreme. Now, there is a law enforcement show that I really enjoy, The Rookie. And season 2 of the show, I'm pretty sure it was season 2, Officer Jackson West, he was put with a temporary FTO, field training officer. And this field training officer, I mean, there were a few good things about this individual, but he took suspiciousness and maintaining the edge to a major extreme. Whenever he was with minorities, he automatically started thinking they were gangbangers. And that affected how he handled the situation. They were, the FTO and Officer West were on, were looking for a suspect, and they found someone that could have potentially met the description. And there was an incident with that, and the FTO automatically started viewing this kid as a danger, even though, hey, the reason he didn't stop was because he had his headphones on. He couldn't hear what was going on. And the officer ended up just escalating the situation with that subject as well as their family. I mean, if you watch the episode, the call got really bad. And that's something that can actually happen when suspiciousness and maintaining the edge go to that negative extreme. Is you could start stereotyping individuals. You could end up showing way too much authority to where you're holding yourself totally separate from the citizens. I'm a cop, I know how to do my job. You're a citizen, you don't know squat. It can go to that major negative extreme. Now we're going to look at the coping mechanisms related to the organizational environment. Now, the first one is lay low, or CYA, cover your ass. Now, it's utilized to resolve stress and anxiety created as a result of the supervisor's focus on rule violations. Now, you'll find, and this is common with any type of job, unfortunately, you'll have supervisors really won't tell you when you're doing a good job very much. Really, the only time you hear about how you're doing on the job is when you mess up. They give you a verbal reprimand, they give you a write-up, you get formal disciplinary action. So sometimes how officers will adapt to this is they won't really engage in anything that could end up bringing undue attention to themselves, like disciplinary action, getting complaints from citizens, lawsuits, etc. Now, the CYA syndrome can have extreme effects in the manner law enforcement officers perform their jobs. Now, an officer can, if this goes extreme, it could be a major detriment. They can become so fearful of disciplinary action and being second guessed by supervisors and review boards and other individuals that they might avoid all situations in which they're going to be using this discretion where they're allowed to make the decision on what happens, and they might just do enough to just get by. Now, in some of the classes I'm teaching, we'll discuss the Ferguson effect. Now, that came from really around this time, and it's actually been about close to a decade ago. Although we keep having spurts, you'll end up having spurts of excessive use of force claims that have received a lot of media attention. We just recently had one again with everything that happened with George Floyd, and there were also other incidents that happened right around that same time that again got a lot of media attention. But you'll have some officers, even ones that are part of the majority, the good officers, professional officers, the ones that wouldn't use excessive force and brutality on citizens, the ones that aren't racially biased, they can end up getting scared because, hey, I don't want to put myself into the situation where now I've got the public thinking I'm a bad guy. And there have been situations where officers did do exactly what they were supposed to. Didn't use excessive use of force, weren't racially biased, but the public perceived the situation that way, even though the situation wasn't. And that created a lot of fear with officers, and that's called the Ferguson effect. Because the actions of the minority of officers, the ones that, broke the law, engaged in brutality, excessive force, were racially biased, etc., they get the media attention. So situations where none of that's involved, they can still get misread. And so you even have good officers are scared to engage in any situation where they could be second guessed by the public. And that's the Ferguson effect. So you can see where lay low, especially when it gets into CYA syndrome. It can have really bad results because, hey, I don't want to put myself in a situation where I could get disciplinary action. I am going to be second guessed. Now, really, with this, I am going to say that the majority of law enforcement do their job appropriately. And if you are going in doing your job appropriately and your intent's good, you don't have anything to worry about. Even when you do your job to the letter, you're still going to make mistakes once in a while. You're still going to get citizen complaints, even when they're not justified. You're still going to get citizen complaints. You're still going to get sued. I was sued twice and I did everything I was supposed to. And this was working corrections. So things are going to happen. So it's basically, if you go in doing the job the way you're supposed to, you don't have anything to worry about. I just want to put that disclaimer out there. Now, the next adaptation to the organizational environment is the crime fighter orientation. Now, this adheres to the traditional model of law enforcement that we talked about earlier, and it utilizes coercion and threat of arrest to gain compliance and focuses on applying the law, deterring crime and serious crime. So as you can see, this is like polar opposite from what officers should be doing in community-oriented and problem-oriented policing. The polar opposite. As you can see, the crime fighter orientation, it does go with maintaining the edge. Now, the crime fighter orientation, it mandates a separation of law enforcement from the public to allow the officer to objectively and impartially protection from danger and reduction of the likelihood of becoming compromised. Again, now in low sides, it's like, okay, yes, law enforcement do have to remain impartial. They can't become compromised. They do need to be objective. But with the crime fighter orientation, this adaptation, we're starting to hit extreme. Now, this orientation, it is used to deal with stress and anxiety associated with role ambiguity, which that's confusion regarding what you're supposed to do. And with law enforcement, you do have a lot of discretion. And even though officers are trained and they're very knowledgeable, sometimes you're not sure what the heck to do in a situation. And that can cause issues. Now, the crime fighter orientation, it can create alienation and tension between law enforcement and the community, especially when it starts going major extreme. Because then, when it starts going extreme, you're using that coercion and that threat to gain compliance, and you're not partnering with the community. Now, we already touched on some of the problems, so let's just kind of review them. Now, if left unchecked, and especially when they start going like moderate to extreme, they can cause major issues, and we've discussed quite a few of them. Also, the patrol subculture, they can start becoming really extremely isolated from the community they're sworn to protect. And this can happen even in agencies that use problem-oriented and community-oriented policing, where you're encouraged to get out of your patrol vehicle, squad car, shop, whatever you want to call it, and actually talk to people, you might stop doing that. You might end up becoming isolated. You could start viewing the public as adversaries due to one, their negative perceptions and attitudes towards police. And we've had that. We had that around the time of Rodney King. We had that around the time of Ferguson. We had that again recently with, Black Lives Matter, defund the police, where the public, because of the illicit actions of the minority of law enforcement, the few, the public starts viewing all of law enforcement that way. You're bad cops, you're all racist, you just beat on people. And that can hit the majority of officers that are good, that do their jobs appropriately. That can hit them really, really hard. As well as, that danger that those you come across on the job, that they are a potential danger to you. That can start taking a toll, especially if you're an officer that you're patrolling a high crime area. All of that can start majorly taking a toll. And that negative view of the public, that can start creating an us against them mentality, in which you can start viewing everybody that's not law enforcement as either a perp or a victim. And you can also start stereotyping even further too, to where, maybe you're working in an area that is high crime and you have a lot of minorities living in that area. You could start stereotyping minorities. Oh, well, you're all just a bunch of criminals, which is not a true stereotype and a very bad stereotype. So you can see the problems when these adaptations start going awry, the problems that they can create. And if the patrol subculture ends up getting separated from the community, it makes problem-oriented and community-oriented policing pretty much impossible. If you're viewing, if you have that us against them mentality, and, oh, well, public, they just feel so, they have just such bad attitudes about us and they're a danger. And if you start, labeling individuals, as perps or victims, are you really going to want to partner with the community? That's why it's important that law enforcement agencies make sure that these adaptations do remain checked. Again, maintaining the edge and suspiciousness are not bad things in small amounts because they are survival tools. But, CYA syndrome and that crime fighter orientation, those are bad. So it's important that, departments make sure that maintaining the edge and suspiciousness aren't getting to the major extremes. And that if they are with officers, okay, we need to get you some help. Maybe we need to get you off the street for a little while, get you into counseling. Maybe we need to put you in a different patrol area for a little while. And obviously, with crime fighter orientation and, lay low CYA, you've got to majorly address that too. Because even with lower levels, both of those can be bad. I hope all of you enjoyed the presentation. If you've got any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to contact me. And if there's ever anything else you want me to do a presentation on, just let me know. Again, thank you for watching and have a good rest of your day and stay safe out there.